explaining the life of Joseph as a slave. To understand the life of Joseph, it helps a bit to learn about clan politics. If you like these videos and wish to help us out, please click on that subscribe button. It really matters to us. And if you wish to help us out financially, please consider becoming a Patreon member or buying my book, The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context, an Illustrated Journey. Okay, we're going to talk today about the life of Joseph, the early life from his time as Jacob's son until the time he's sent to prison. But to understand the life of Joseph, we need to talk a little bit about how clans and clan politics work. Clans were familial associations of 4 generations, and clans were loosely associated as a group in the form of tribes. Now, tribal leaders had little or no actual power. All the power sort of rests with the clans. So when Isaac dies, Jacob forms a new clan and becomes independent of any tribal affiliation that he might have had through his father. Joseph was one of the 12 sons and a countless number of unnamed sisters. Okay? It's very important that there probably wasn't just 12 sons, and we don't have no idea how many sisters he actually had. And while not the firstborn, Joseph was Jacob's favorite. To show his favoritism, Jacob made Joseph a varicolored tunic, the famous coat of many colors. And he gave it to Joseph. And we see examples of these tunics in the Middle Kingdom tombs of Semitic Asiatics at Beni Hassan. Now, in his early life, Joseph had developed a bit of a reputation for being a snitch. He would rat on his brothers when they were misbehaving out in the fields, which his brothers resented. So his brothers sought to teach Joseph a bit of a lesson. They were just going to sort of throw him into a pit and just scare him for a bit. But those plans quickly changed. And his brothers took his tunic, dipped it in goat's blood, and sent it back to his father as proof that Joseph died. Joseph was then sold into slavery to Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, Genesis 37:28. So, who were the Ishmaelites? The Ishmaelites were descendants of Ishmael, son of Abraham. They lived in Edom and Moab, a region that covers Israel and modern Jordan. The sons of Ishmael had divided into 12 clans and had a tribal confederacy, very similar to the later Israelites. And they appeared to have spoken a dialect of the common Semitic language. They were also traders that dealt in incense and spices from Africa, but they were also not opposed to trading other goods, such as slaves. And contrary to common belief, the Ishmaelites appeared to be unrelated to modern Arabs, and appear to have been driven out of their homelands by the incursion of later tribal groups. The Ishmaelites appear to have died out around the 10th century BC, about 2 centuries before we see the rise of modern Arab groups, modern Arab tribes. Once in Egypt, Joseph is resold as a slave. Now, Kenneth Kitchen did an analysis of slave prices in the ancient Near East, and he discovered that 20 shekels of silver was the going rate for a slave around the time of the late 12th dynasty until the 15th dynasty, the Hyksos reign. So, from the end of the Middle Kingdom until the Second Intermediate Period, the going rate for a slave was about 20 shekels of silver. Once in Egypt, Joseph was resold to Potiphar, Genesis 37:36. Now, Potiphar is a very interesting name. It's an Egyptian name. It comes from the Egyptian Pa Df Re. He is the gift of the sun god Re. It's a distinctly Egyptian name. So that is very, very interesting right there. So we see that Egyptianism in the Joseph narrative. Now, in the Joseph narrative, we also see some customs that are uniquely Egyptian. In Genesis 39, verse 1, Joseph is made overseer of Potiphar's household. Now, this was a common custom for upper middle class Egyptians to have an overseer of your house, what is called the Imira pair, the overseer of your house. And he was essentially the guy who managed your household. He made sure the household was supplied with food, other slaves were doing what they were supposed to be doing. He managed the day-to-day business of running a house so that you didn't have to. So this is a custom that we see very, very common in Egypt that we don't see, say, in Israel later on. And as Joseph matures, he's noticed by Potiphar's wife as the object of her desire. Now, the infidelity shown by Potiphar's wife is also very common in Egyptian society. And while there are tales of wives in Egypt being executed for infidelity, it was much, much, much more common for an unfaithful spouse to simply be divorced. And that's because once you start getting into the higher ranks, you can't really execute an unfaithful wife because there's political ramifications. You run afoul of other people's clans, and it's just easier to divorce. And in Egyptian society, entering into marriage was easy, and divorcing was easy. And in the middle classes, marriage was kind of a revolving door. People were often married and divorced several times. So there was this idea that you could get divorced really, really easily. However, once you were married, once you were in that sort of marriage relationship, you were expected to have children just with your spouse. Now, if you happen to have children with another man outside of marriage, that would have ramifications and consequences, but it still didn't normally end in the death penalty. However, Potiphar's wife was accusing a slave of rape of someone above his social class. That was a crime. That was different. The actual crime involved here is having sex outside of the social class, not necessarily having sex out of marriage. under these situations, the slave, or even the unfaithful wife, could be remanded to the courts for punishment. The problem here, we have to understand, isn't extramarital sex. And sometimes we read this narrative and think the problem is extramarital sex. And it really isn't. That's not the problem. The problem, it was with whom Potiphar's wife was having sex with, which was someone many, many tiers below her social status. That's the crime, is transcending the social class barriers, not the extramarital sex. So it's very important to keep that in mind. That's the crime in ancient Egypt. So what happens then is the slave is turned over to the court system. Joseph is given to the courts for punishment. He's no longer a slave at that point. He's a criminal. Now, the Egyptian concept of jail is a little different than it is in the West, too. There's no bars, there's no doors, there's no locks. There are guards, but there's no doors, because what they did when they put you in jail was they shipped you off to a stone quarry in the middle of the desert. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, you cannot escape. It's completely impractical, because you'll probably die of thirst. You'll die in thirst and of heat and of exposure long before you get into anywhere civilized. So you're stuck. And even today, we still locate some prisons in deserts to make escape impractical. And that's what the Egyptians did. Now, Joseph was remanded over to the king for judgment. And it became the prerogative of the king to do anything he wants with a prisoner in his custody. Egypt was a military dictatorship. And dictatorships weren't exactly known for clemency. There was no speedy justice. Joseph could have just as easily been forgotten as face execution. The king was under no obligation to act on a case or even act justly. And Joseph probably would have been forgotten if the king had not been troubled by a dream, and the cupbearer remembered a certain man who could interpret dreams. Well, that is all for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found something interesting in the life of Joseph and the cultural context that he lived in. And I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.